In today's video, I'm going to show you some really cool candle wax and watercolor techniques. So before we get on with today's video, I will just address the elephant in the room, which is my chin, before I get any comments about it or any of you worrying about me. That doesn't happen very often on the internet, does it? Anyhow, about 20 years ago, 2 lumps appeared on my chin, warts. They appeared as if I was some kind of old person. I never invited them in. I wasn't born with them and I don't want to die with them. And frankly, they've never paid any rent. So on Saturday, in return for money, a nice lady applied some liquid nitrogen to them, and they should be gone soon once I've gone through this kind of nasty scabby phase. So if you haven't all gone off to throw up, let's get on with today's video. I'm going to show you some really cool techniques involving candle wax, because I included it in my last video and so many of you were fascinated by it. It's not shown as often as some other techniques on the internet, and yet it's really, really useful. I'm going to show you several ways of using it with your watercolors. I'll show you some application samples, and make sure you watch to the end of the video, because I'll also show you how those samples dried. Now let's get started so you don't have to look at my face any longer. So let's start with the most obvious and the most known about technique for candle wax. So I've got a standard household candle here. Please don't ask me what it's made of because I have no idea. It's the cheapest of the cheap, just your standard wax household candle. You can of course also use tea lights. I've got quite a cheap old brush, which I always suggest using for any kind of wax resist or on top of oil pastels. And the most talked about use for candle wax is just to rub it across your paper so it catches on the top of the bumps. And I'm using a fairly smooth paper today. Now it's not a hot press paper, but it's not the most textured either. So do be aware that if you use a more textured paper, you'll get more gaps and more texture. And we're just going to take the blue across here and we get this beautiful sparkle on water effect. But if you've watched my channel for a long time, you'll know that I'm super into techniques, and finding out about something like this is never enough for me because I start asking questions. Well, can I do it on top of paint? Can I do it on top of dry paint? Can I remove it? Can I use a stencil? And so I go down this whole rabbit hole of exploration, and that's what we're going to look at today. Now, I spoke about using oil pastel, but actually candle wax has one big advantage. Well, I'll say 2 advantages. One is that it's transparent, so it can also reserve a dried underneath layer of paint, such as I've got here. And the other advantage is that it's just not as showy and as noticeable as oil pastel. So oil pastel can be great. It's opaque. You can put it on top of watercolor, but it will notice quite a lot. So let's look now at making a sparkle on a sunset painting. So what I've done here is I've put some of this pink into an area that's going to be the water. So we can imagine we have a nice pink sky above. Now I've not put it over the whole area, and that's because obviously if we lay blue on top of this sunsetty pink, it's going to dull it a little bit or make it more purple, which is kind of okay, but you may not want that on the whole area. So what I'm going to do now is apply my candle wax again. I'll go for a bit of a brighter blue this time. And now we get the sunset reflected in our water. I'll show you how all of these techniques look once they're dry at the end of the video. I'll also tell you how you can remove the candle wax if you've applied too much. Now, the next technique solves a problem that I'm asked about so many times and have been asked about over the last 20 years, and that's how to paint the area where water and waves break onto a beach. And people often try to do this with masking fluid. I used to try masking fluid all the time for water. It's just too hard-edged. It doesn't look natural. So what I'm going to do instead is we're going to do the same with the candle wax, but this time we're going to try and get some more wave shapes. Yes, it can be hard to see where you're working, so it's important to sort of try it out first on a scrap of paper. If you're not filming for YouTube, you can hold your piece of paper up to the light and you'll be able to see where the candle wax has been applied to, so you can see if you need to add any more. I'm just going to guess. And we'll go in from the top. I'm going to add a little yellow to this so that we get a bit more of a sea-type colour. If you want to know what colours I'm using today, have a look in the video description. I'll list them all down there for you. I'm going to come in from the other side with a little raw umber, maybe even some yellow ochre. And then we're just going to let these areas overlap as they would do naturally on the beach. If I want a bit of shadow in here, I can always go in with a bit of pink or purple just to neutralize things a little. We'll have a look at the end and see how this has dried. So let's go back to our idea of working on top of dry paint, as I have done here. I've painted a tree trunk, but how do you get the wax so that it doesn't go outside of the area? So if I want to put some wax on here and get a bit of sunlight or a bit of texture, how am I going to stop it just going everywhere? So I've got some tape here. This is Scotch tape, and I found that it's much more reliable than masking tape for keeping paint out of certain areas. Now, masking tape certainly has its uses, but this Scotch tape actually is pretty good at stopping seepage. So I've applied it along the edge, and now I'm free to go ahead and use my candle wax and go right up to the edge of the tape. Note that I'm not going this way, both because tree trunks tend to have linear markings, but also because I don't want to push any wax under the tape or lift the tape. Now, if I'm concerned that my paint will also get outside of the tree trunk, I could leave the tape on while I paint. I'm actually going to remove it, pulling as always at a low angle. This helps to prevent tearing. Pull it slowly too. It's not a plaster. You don't have to rip it off. Now I'm simply going to paint over my tree again in a darker colour. And we should start to see those light areas appear. Now, if you are new to my channel or new to watercolour painting, it's going to surprise you to learn that YouTube has not so far made me a millionaire. It's really disappointing, to be honest. I actually make my living from selling online art courses. So although I have hundreds of free videos here on YouTube, and I always will make free content available, if you need something more structured, I do have a complete beginner's watercolor course. You can start to learn right from the beginning, things like flat washes, graduated washes. I also have beginner's drawing, as well as some more advanced courses. Let's see how that dries. Really happy with it so far. Now, I didn't want to come back on camera because of the whole face thing, but I've been forced to because unfortunately about 60% of you watching this video are not subscribed. I've made you over 300 free videos here on YouTube, all with the intention of helping you to get better at painting and drawing. If you'd like to pay it forward, all you have to do is press the subscribe button. Whilst you're there, you might as well press that thumbs up button as well. Both of these things, like all the videos on my channel, are completely free. What we're going to do now is something much more precise. Now, if you notice at the end of the video that the sample for this one looks slightly different to the other one, which is here, it's because I've had to film this clip again because something happened, the sound was corrupted and it just didn't work. What I've done here is I've applied some masking tape, but you can use any kind of tape as long as it doesn't tear your paper. I've actually stuck this to my clothing a few times. It's also picked up some nice gimlet cat hairs, but that doesn't matter at all. What we're going to do is we're going to apply this really quite firmly between the gap in the tape. We go up and down. The idea is to get as much of the candle wax in that gap as possible, and you can do it thinner than this. Then we're going to remove the tape. So you can really get quite fine lines like this. They're never going to be as precise as masking fluid. They'll be a little bit more gappy, but they can actually look, a little bit more natural if that's what you're looking for. Of course, if you want a curved line, such as maybe a little plant stamen, then you will want to use masking fluid. But I know some of you just don't like using masking fluid at all. And you can get little straight lines like this. So let's put some paint on. I'll approximate the colour I was using yesterday. And it just means that you can paint across this with multiple colours, and we get that nice straight-sided line with a little bit of variation. So let's be even more precise now. I've got here some grease-proof baking paper from the kitchen, or you can use a piece of tracing paper or something similar. And I'm going to rub as much candle wax as I can on it. I'm going to do this off camera because I don't want to dent my paper, but I also don't want to get a load of texture from my board. So I'm going to pick a nice flat surface like a magazine and apply lots of this candle wax to the paper. Now I'm going to turn it over so it's wax side down. And here I've got an embossing tool. If you don't have one of these, nail art tools are pretty much the same. You can use a ballpoint pen without any ink in it. You can even use a hard pencil like an HB. And I'm just doing some little circles and spots. Now again, it won't be as precise as masking fluid, but it may be more natural looking. So this is something we could use for something like animal print. We could use it for the little speckles in the center of flowers. Really, so many choices. And we've got some fantastic little markings here without that absolute crispness of masking fluid, which might sometimes be what you want. But if you're looking for something softer, this is a great alternative. Next, let's look at a fun way of making a big shimmery sun or moon. I've got this rather fancy stencil, but if you don't have one of these, there's probably all sorts of things around your house that you could use. Maybe some kind of plastic ring from your recycle bin or metal, anything will do. And what I'm going to do is I've got a smaller piece of candle wax here just because it's easier for me. I'm going to just rub this in this area here. Now let's paint across the top. And I think all you need now is a werewolf. So let's look at the results, and I'll give you a couple of ways you can adjust them if you're not entirely happy. So here is our sparkle on water. Looks good. It's a little bit flat. We might put another layer on this in a moment. Here is our sunset sparkle. Now, could I have taken the sparkles further out and got some white ones as well? Of course, there are so many ways you can use these techniques. This one I'm super happy with. Again, possible to work on top and get more depth of colour. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. This one I'm really happy with. I think I would have combined it if I was doing a full painting with some scratching or embossing techniques. I have a whole video all about tree bark. I'll leave a link to it in the description of this one. This I think is great. Again, it's not going to be exactly the same as masking fluid, but I think this is really nice for getting a straight edge that's still somewhat natural. I can see this actually used the other way round in combination with the sparkle on the water, perhaps to get that line across the horizon, or just some areas where there is sort of more white ripples. This one I really like. I think it's got so many applications. Could even be flowers in a flower bed. Remember, if it doesn't show up, then often it's just that you need to have darker paint. I've been in my art classes so many times and people have said, oh, this hasn't worked, Michelle. And it's just that they've gone too pale with the paint. And so you need dark paint for these light areas to show up. And here we have our moon. Again, I think the sparkle makes it look really interesting. Could equally be used for a sun. Let's look at a couple of ways of adding more colour if we need to. Firstly, we could just take the same colour across and get a darker effect. We could go in with clean water if we wanted to just add more colour in one place. Let's put some pink on this because why not? Or we could go in again and get more depth of colour in places. I'm just putting clean water on here again. And I could use some darker paint to highlight certain areas. You'll notice I'm re-wetting the whole area even when I'm only putting paint in one or two places. That's so that the water doesn't leave any drying lines or watermarks. Finally, let's talk about what to do if you have a complete disaster and you've just put too much wax on or it's in the wrong place. So the easiest way to solve this problem is not to do it in the first place. And yes, I do have a solution if you've already done it, but hear me out. The more you practice this, and I don't just mean once and then you use it in your paintings, the more you practice this directly before you do it, using the same paper, with the same room temperature, the same pigments you're going to use in your main painting, the better you'll be at judging how much wax you need to put on so that you get the right result. Now, if you have made a big error with the wax, you can take it to the ironing board, place some paper towel or a cloth on top, make sure it's a dry cloth, and you can press and iron. You must be careful doing this. You'll have to accept that it's probably not going to get all of the wax out. Be careful whenever you're ironing anything paper. If you iron for too long or it's too hot, then of course it can catch fire. But it is possible to remove not all the wax, but enough. If, for example, you've been working on an area of splashy waves like we looked at earlier and you've just got too much white in there, it may be possible to remove enough wax that you can put a little more paint on top. So do let me know in the comments if any of these techniques were new to you, if you're going to find them useful when creating your own watercolours. And before you leave this video, don't forget to have a look in the video description. I've got all sorts of free stuff down there for you. I've got free downloadables. There's even a free course or two that you can take. And of course, you can find out all about my 5-star online painting and drawing courses. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you can pop back and see all of the new videos I upload, or just find out what happens to my chin. And if you enjoyed this video and you're looking to level up your watercolour skills really fast, I've got another video here that I think you're going to find really interesting.